I really want to paint a portrait of a drag queen. I don't know a drag queen personally. 1 plus 1 equals 2. I need to become a drag queen. I've been practicing drag makeup for a couple years now. My personal Instagram is no stranger to a fun surprise on a random weekday evening, but I've never done like a full drag look before. I don't know how to sew. I've never sewn anything before. This was one of those like divine moments of inspiration where I was tossing and turning all night long, envisioning the garment I wanted to make and how I would do my makeup and what the final painting would look like. So the next day I walked into my local fabric store not even knowing what a bobbin was, and I was like, okay, I have a budget of $300 and I want to walk home with a full kit that I need to learn how to sew. And the lady behind the counter was so excited. She was like, follow me. I spent that day learning how to use my machine, and then the next day I spent working on my first like real project, and I didn't film it at all because it was for me. I wanted to make like a practice garment before I started working on my drag look. So what I did is I had like 6 old sweatshirts in my closet that were either too small for me or stained, or I just never wore them, and I cut them all up, and then I traced out my favorite crew neck and made like a patchwork pattern. And I know that this isn't particularly polished and some of the panels don't lay quite right, but I had so much fun working on this. I actually already started working on my first piece for my drag look. I found a trash bag of a bunch of old t-shirts in my attic, and I made them into this like ruffle top shoulder thing. This basically took me like all day yesterday. I cut up all of the old t-shirts into like these really long strips and sewed the strips together on each end to make the strips even longer. Then I sewed along the edge to make them into a tube. I turned that tube inside out and ruffled it on one side. And then I sewed those ruffles onto the base thing that I made. Each of these strips is like a full t-shirt. So this thing is like pretty heavy, and I think it has some like cool movement. And I really like that even though I was using t-shirts, I was able to make something with a really cool silhouette, and like there's structure here, and then once there's like a waist on this, like this is gonna be sickening. Today I think I want to make some sleeves. I've done very little sketching. I don't know what this garment is gonna end up looking like. I want to make everything as it responds to what I've already made. In the first half of this video I want to sew my garment and get in drag, and then in the second half I want to make my painting. So I guess I'll get back to sewing. This is my first real sewing project, so I didn't want to splurge like $200 on materials if I already bought my sewing machine and stuff, so I decided to take a bunch of old clothes and cut them up to use as material. I also hit a thrift store and I spent like $5 on some fabric that they had there. There came a point later in this process where I did decide to hit my local fabric store, and I dropped like $30 on 5 yards of fabric because it's really hard to make a corset cover out of old t-shirts, you know? So I'd say that like 80% of the fabric that I used for this whole garment was either upcycled or thrifted. The sewing machine was obviously a really big expense, but beyond that, I only spent like $40 to make this whole look. I did already own a steel bone corset, and that was nice to be able to pull out. I bought it maybe a year ago for fun. God forbid a gay person has a hobby. But here's the thing. I don't have pads. I don't have wigs. I don't have jewelry. I don't have stones. I don't have nails. So I needed to do everything in my power to disguise the places where I was kind of giving baby queen. For example, I patterned out a balaclava later on so that I didn't need to wear a wig, and then I did a lot of ruffling around my waist and bust to create that really drag hourglass silhouette without having to wear pads. I could sit here and try to explain everything that I'm doing, but I don't know what I'm doing, so I think it would be much more interesting if I take this time to share an art philosophy that I've been thinking about a lot recently. I'm somebody who's always loved doing things with my hands. I love to paint and draw and crochet and make friendship bracelets and do jigsaw puzzles. I've always been that kid that you can't pull away from their little craft. While everybody was running around the playground, I was sitting under a tree with my Rainbow Loom project that I was wildly determined to finish. With Rainbow Loom as a kid, I found that the YouTube tutorials were really pedagogic and boring, so I tried to make my own designs, and they didn't look as good, but the bracelets were unique, and you can count on that. I was the same way with crocheting. When I was taught, I think think I learned how to chain, and then maybe I learned how to like single crochet or double crochet. One of the two. I never really learned the stitch names. Beyond that, I wasn't really interested in learning anything else. I was much more interested in taking the yarn and seeing what would happen if I yarned over twice, or if I added a chain after every stitch. And if it held together, that was great. And if it fell apart, I would try again and do something new. After a while, it got to a point where I was inventing these stitches that were a series of like 20 steps. I was doing some funky shit that I probably would have never attempted if I followed the more standard course of learning. Even with math, I was inclined to find my own ways of solving the brand new equations while the teacher was taking forever describing their own way. Showing my work was the most miserable thing as a kid because my logic was so twisted, but it was still correct. Here's what I'm getting at. If you're learning a new avenue of craftsmanship, being taught can be one of the worst things that you do for your creativity. I'm someone where it's always been my instinct to take the materials and just run. The mind uninhibited by rules is so interesting to me. If you had no idea what crocheting was, and you were given some yarn and told to crochet, what type of stitches do you think could be made? How would you go about making them? Maybe nobody has ever approached creating the same way that you just have. Creativity is all about making things that are true to you, and I don't think that that has any rules. When I started doing art, all I had was paints, canvases, and a blast, and that's the approach that I recommend to anyone pursuing a creative hobby. Painting just so happened to really stick with me, so of course along the way I did inevitably stumble into educational content, but I didn't pursue that knowledge until I had an established relationship with my creative practice. In high school, I had a staycation spring break, and for some reason I was really inspired to crochet after not doing it for a couple years. I started out not really knowing what I was making, and then it kind of became a sleeve, and that flowed into this plate that I would strap around my chest, and then I inevitably worked my way across to the other sleeve. Every single row of stitches that I did in this garment, I was getting bored, so I was trying to think of a new way that I could create a stitch. I worked on this for like 12 hours a day for my entire spring break, and I had so much fun. I inevitably decided to wear this to prom. Did I look good? Not really. It wasn't flattering, it kept slipping down my arms, and there was yarn sticking out where I didn't weave it in properly. But guess what? I felt so confident because I was proud of what I had made. I loved the feeling of a couple dozen hours of my work around my body, and even more than that, I loved telling people that I made it. I far preferred the experience of wearing my outfit compared to renting some suit that would probably make me feel dysphoric anyway. I don't think that this top looks good. It didn't fit me then, and it fits me worse now, but I wouldn't change it in any lifetime because I made my prom outfit, and I think that's really cool. There's a drag queen on this season of Drag Race named Lydia Butthole Collins. During her entrance, the producers decided to include a confessional where she said, "My drag is very DIY. Cut it, hack it up, glue it back together again, and if it's not completely 100% perfect, that's alright with me. I value creativity over perfection." This is a wild amount of nuance to make the Drag Race edit, but I'm so happy that they included it because it has put to words a perspective that resonates with me, and it has allowed me some greater reflection about my creative values, especially as I begin sewing myself. So that's what I'm thinking about while I make this. Remember when Derek Barry said, "Everywhere you look there's a hem"? Okay, well, everywhere you look on my garment, there's not a hem, because I would rather spend 2 hours doing something a lot more interesting than hemming the inside of my train. I'm confident that I'm a much better painter than I am a seamstress, and remember, the end goal is to make a finished painting, not a garment. So anything that I can't achieve in material, hey, I'm just gonna let it be, and then I can address it later in paint. I'm really geeked that I documented myself falling in love with a new avenue of creation. I had so much fun working on this. As I said at the beginning, I spent 3 days learning my machine and working on that crew neck that I showed you, and then I flowed directly into this project. And I worked on this one for probably about 6 full days. So I dumped like 100 hours into sewing over the last 2 weeks. I wasn't doing any actual painting during this time, and that's technically my job right now, so I'm not sure if I can entirely justify this detour. In my head, I rationalized it because I was filming it for YouTube, and I make a little bit of money on here, and I wasn't working on a painting, but I was working towards a painting, and that gave me a little bit of peace. But I did feel a little bit of shame basically working on an unpaid hobby for 2 weeks. That's been a really odd feeling since I've started painting professionally. Whenever I'm not being exceptionally productive in any of my painting projects, shame starts to linger in, and I don't know entirely how to combat that feeling quite yet. If I'm being completely honest, by the end of this sewing process, I was feeling a wee bit burnt out. Give me like a month and I'll be teething to start a new sewing project, but as for now, I was eager to do my makeup and start the painting. Okay, I just took a Tylenol. It's 2 p.m. Let's get painted. My favorite part about drag is makeup. I've watched Nikki tutorials since I was like 10 years old. I could write an entire dissertation about Dramageddon. I think that's just the painter in me. Like, I love faces and I love art, and makeup is just art on your face. The only through line that's really important to me is that I want to be completely unrecognizable. Whenever I sit down to do my makeup, my goal is to see how far I can push my features. Like, I have pretty unique muscles in my smile. So in the past, I've been able to draw on this like really crazy witchy grin. Like, I can really take advantage of my anatomy there. I'm not gonna do that smile today because I wanna be a little bit more avant-garde and a little bit less clowny with my mug today. But that's what I'm trying to say, is that I wanna completely rewrite this. I always do a final debrief on my paintings where I kind of deliver a self-critique, so I thought I might as well do one for my drag as well. I think I look great. I feel amazing. As I said, I wasn't entirely going for polish, so I'm fine that some of these things look a little bit crafty. However, I would do some things differently. For this shoulder thing, I didn't learn how to do ruffles consistently until the very end, so you can see me like learn to do ruffles as you go down the garment. When I was patterning out this top, I didn't really think about how my corset would peek out the back, and I wish I would have at least thought about that. I think that this headpiece is kind of cool and interesting, but I feel like it doesn't really match the rest of the garment. Like, neck down, I feel like I'm kind of giving jester, and then this headpiece is giving like shitty Ren Bear. Call me delusional, but I think that if I wore this on a Drag Race design challenge, I would be at least safe. It took me like 4 hours to get in full drag, but I guess I'll go take some reference photos now. It's the next day. I'm doing some sketching. The reference photo session yesterday went great, except like 70% of the photos were blurry. Luckily, there's still some usable stuff in there, and I think I've landed on the reference photo that I'm gonna end up painting. I've only been sketching for like an hour. I should definitely be doing a lot more. But to be honest, I'm just getting bored. So I think I'm gonna cut out a new piece of canvas and start working on the painting. If you've ever watched me make any of my paintings, you'd be familiar with my process. I start out with a canvas taped to my wall, and I build up an acrylic underpainting for the first couple days. Once the underpainting is done and I know how big I want it, I stretch my canvas and transition to oil paint. I find that this process is very agile and intuitive, and I'm really comfortable evolving my paintings in this way. As I start this painting, I'm beginning to understand what this painting process is going to be like. I have a very intimate understanding of the construction of this garment, and I'm able to approach my painting process from that perspective. And as I said, I think I'm a way better painter than a drag queen, so anything that I'm not able to achieve with my craftsmanship, I'm kind of able to zhuzh it up as I bring it to the canvas. At the same time, this piece is all about my love of creation and the clunky beginnings of my drag artistry. I have just outlined the very nuanced balance that I have to navigate in this process. Something that I've learned about creating an impactful figurative painting is that you want to create something that is as dynamic as possible. So for instance, if you're going to paint someone where one shoulder is lower than the other, a good painter might lower that shoulder even more to create a bit of drama. So the painter in me wants to take my drag and turn it into the most dynamic painting possible, which in turn is going to make my drag look a lot more impressive than it perhaps looked in person. In the pursuit pursuit of a dynamic painting, I want to make sure that I don't airbrush all of the character out of my drag. I think that my garment looks kind of experimental and crafty, and that's a lot more interesting to me than straight lines and boring ideas. I think it's kind of charming that if you look really closely, you can see that some of the threads are poking out, and you can tell it doesn't fit me perfectly. I want the viewer to be able to look at my painting and very easily tell that I made the outfit. So the goal that I've landed on is that I want to capture the most dynamic version of my imperfect drag. I want to include the mistakes that give this outfit its character, but I also want to add that extra little cinch to the corset that I wasn't able to create with my garment. And I want to fluff up the ruffles a little bit to create a more bold silhouette. In terms of color especially, I definitely want to paint colors that are a lot more cohesive and refined than the material that I had available to me. I may not have the technique, I may not have the materials, but what I do have is a strong vision. And in my opinion, that's the most important thing about creating a successful piece of art. I feel like I'm really honing in on an idea that I really want to make clear because I think that everyone should reflect on it within their own artistic practice. Perfection is overrated. The pursuit of perfection often stifles the authenticity and individuality that I'm looking for within a piece of art. If you're getting sucked into making sure that every detail in your art is just right, I feel like it removes the emotional rawness that makes artwork powerful. Alright, it's day 3 working on this thing. I thought it's time for a check-in. On day 1, I thought I had a banger on my hands. In day 2, I started to like it a little bit less. I think that the composition is going in a good direction. I'm revisiting that trompe-l'oeil frame effect that I was trying out with my last painting, except I want to be a little bit more unexpected with it this time. I really like how I designed this bottom bit. I think I did a really good job there. I'm having the most trouble with color. I want to work with like a red magenta and a teal as like the 2 stars, but with all of this black in the painting, it's starting to look really unnatural to my eyes, kind of like a neon sign. The solution that I'm coming up with is that I need to introduce a third color that's like a natural complement to both these colors so that it kind of kicks them back and they aren't as overwhelming. I think about colors in a very mathematic way, so let me explain this on the color wheel. If I draw a straight line between my 2 main colors, you can see that everything kind of sits on one side of the color wheel. So to find my third color, I find the midpoint on that line and shoot a perpendicular line across the color wheel. And I landed on this like super desaturated olivey yellow color, which makes sense to me because like, ooh, yellow, sunshine, daylight. As you can see, I'm trying to sneak this color in where I can to kind of kick these colors back a little bit. I think that my next move might be to throw that color into some of the shadows a little bit more. Like I think that the solution that I might be looking for is to turn some of these blacks into like a super dark desaturated olive color. The stretcher bars already came in, so I'm gonna spend half my day stretching this thing. It feels a little bit preemptive to transition to working on oils already, so after this thing is stretched, I'm probably gonna spend a couple more sessions working on it in acrylic just to make sure I'm happy with where everything's going. I really like the idea of being a multidisciplinary artist. I always think it's really cool when people participate in multiple artistic disciplines at the same time. I find that these disciplines can kind of feed into each other, and it can add a lot of character to your art. I think that the art forms of drag and traditional painting intersect in a very interesting and unique way. Like, I was able to approach my drag from the perspective of a painter, and later on I was able to think about my painting like a drag queen. I've very rarely seen drag and painting intersect in the way that I'm attempting. Kay Britton is a drag artist who has drawn self-portraits before in their drag persona, but they kind of exist more in that dark realism realm. I've seen some paintings of drag queens that are a bit closer to my style, but in these cases, the artist did not create the drag themselves. They're painting a portrait of another drag queen. I'm not saying that I'm doing something that's so far from what's ever been seen before. I'm sure that there's a drag queen somewhere who's painted a self-portrait before, but I do think that once I filter my drag through my brush and my aesthetic interests, I think it's gonna birth a new cross-species of interests. This idea of artception, I think it's infinite because there will always be an untapped combination of disciplines to throw together. If you're somebody who creates anything, I think it can be really productive to consider which of your interests you can infuse into your art. In this project, I think I'm stepping away from my niche quite a bit. Right now, I think I fit nicely into this box where I'm an artist who makes paintings in my bedroom, and I post videos about it onto the internet. I was really aware when I started this project that I would be stacking a new niche of drag on top of that. That felt like a really big risk because in my head, in order for people to be interested enough into clicking onto this video, they'd have to be interested in YouTube, painting, and drag all at the same time. I was really nervous that I was getting too niche, but what I found is that I don't need to find an audience who shares all of my interests. All I need to do is find an audience who shares at least one, and along the way, through the content, I will convince them to like my drag too. I've started sharing bits of this process already across my social media, and the reception has been really heartwarming. Instead of narrowing my niche, I feel like I've really expanded it. Maybe this is a testament to how small and close-knit the drag community is, but this project has already opened up an entirely new audience for me. Like, Willem just liked my post, and Charity Case just started following me. I've loved these queens for years, and it's crazy how swiftly I've been able to market my art into their online sphere. Until a week ago, I thought that I made content strictly for people who also make paintings. And yeah, that audience is in direct fire of my niche, but I've learned that fans of drag also cared about my drag enough that they'd want to see my paintings too. And I have the privilege of introducing them to my paintings through that platform. What I found is that art is universal. Basically, everybody engages with some version of art every day. Whether you resonate with music or drawings or live theater, if I'm able to market myself in a way that resonates with someone's interest in art, I'm golden. And along the way, I have the opportunity to introduce that audience to all of my diverse interests. It's been a couple days. I haven't worked on this painting in a while. I've been busy, but honestly, I just felt a little bit of difficulty picking up my brush recently. Whenever I feel like this, I need to step back and remind myself that it's not that serious. So today I'm just gonna sit down and noodle around these edges a little bit. Around this point in the process is when things started to get a lot more heavy for me in terms of subject matter. This project started out with the purest of intent where I just wanted to learn a new art form and I wanted to make a painting dedicated to that. But obviously, drag is a very loaded thing to infuse into your art. It had me thinking about when I was younger and I was so unashamed about the things that I loved, the way that a kid is, you know? Like I had a doll when I was super young and you have 3 seconds to guess her name. Her name was Beautiful Hair, and I was always so drawn to like crafts and stuff that were more associated with femininity. But when I was in late elementary school and people started calling me gay and stuff, I learned to be ashamed of my creativity. So I would hide it. I made sure that no one ever caught me watching like Barbie or H2O, and I would make sure that I wouldn't pick out girly colors when I was making friendship bracelets or something. I mean, this is still pretty gay. I've never been able to pass, but for some reason, I knew that I needed to practice discretion before I even knew what the word gay meant. Now, my ability to create feels like a protest. It's proof that my queerness has a voice. I've now completely grown out of that shame. Well, maybe not all the way, that shit obviously sticks with you. But I love being queer and I'm pretty unashamed about my femininity. As I was coming into myself, it seemed that everyone was kind of moving forward with me. But in the last couple of years, I think that everyone can kind of feel this shift where it's a lot less safe to be queer again. Gen Z men have become the most conservative generation since early Gen Xers. Legislation is now adopting more extremist views and the queer community is really feeling it. For example, in 2023, Tennessee passed the Adult Entertainment Act, which banned minors' access to gender-affirming care. This act also limited where certain types of adult performances could happen. The actual words used were performances that involved male or female impersonators. So when this law was passed, obviously showrunners began canceling drag events in fear of legal repercussions. Trans is who you are. Drag is what you do. Sometimes trans people do participate in the art form of drag, but their identity and their drag are still two very different things. Conservative legislators obviously don't understand this distinction. Anti-trans legislation not only silences trans voices, but it also censors the art of drag. Drag performances are still happening in Tennessee, but under extreme regulation, like they can't happen in public or anywhere a minor could be present. It wouldn't surprise me at all if one day the right to show your drag online went down to the state, and in some states you wouldn't be able to watch this video. I'm just going to use my platform for a second to say this. Trans lives matter. Tennessee's Adult Entertainment Act is a couple words away from banning trans people from walking in public. This is terrifying. Being queer, but especially being trans, is becoming more and more hostile. I haven't addressed these specific politics in this video up until now because I just wanted to show everyone that I'm sewing fabric together. I'm painting my face. I'm literally just making art. But the politics of participating in the art form of drag is not lost on me. If me using the language drag queen to describe this art, if that makes you weary, I wonder what I did in the first 20 minutes to offend you. Cloth doesn't have gender, and it truly troubles me when I post the art that I'm making and people comment Bible verses or my damnation to hell. I make the art that I do so that people in the future are not embarrassed of the art that they should be making. As Megami said, protect queer art. Things are going pretty good. I think I'm actually getting like really geeked about this painting. Standardly, I use really small brushes when I oil paint because it gives me a lot of control, but something that I feel like my art has been missing is really large moments of gesture to counteract how intricate the rest of my rendering is. So for the past couple days, I've been using a lot larger brushes, which is something that's very new for Lana. Beyond that, I've been doing a lot of finger painting actually, and I've been loving the effect that it's creating. It's just such an expressive and dynamic way to move paint around. In the most literal way possible, my fingerprint is all over this painting, and I love that. At the beginning of all my paintings, I throw my reference photo into Photoshop, and then I exaggerate the gesture. With this painting, I like hunched my figure over a little bit more, and I ever so slightly like tucked my head behind my arm. So then when it's time to capture the gesture onto the canvas, I have to do a lot less work to capture something that's really dynamic. Yesterday, I was looking at this painting and I was looking back at my reference photos, and I realized I've been using the unedited reference photo the whole time. So can't do anything about that now. I don't know how much of this painting I have left, but moving forward, I want to take what I have and I'm going to do my best to manipulate it to be the most dynamic version possible. Drag queens obviously put a lot of work into their makeup, so oftentimes they demand a certain standard of lighting during photo shoots, and then beyond that, a lot of queens filter their photos, so there's very much an aesthetic that comes with how queens present their drag online. And I see nothing wrong with that, of course. One of my favorite things in drag is when a queen paints a really intense highlight on the center of her face, and when the spotlight hits it from stage, it's just magical, like they own that room. Beauty lighting is exceptional at presenting drag makeup in a very polished way, but as a viewer, sometimes I feel a disconnect. Like, I can feel the filters, I can feel the camera, there's something that separates me from that moment. The more compelling photos to me would be like a candid in the back of a nightclub. That to me captures a level of realism that I can connect with. In this piece, I'm painting my drag under very non-traditional lighting. I stood next to the best window in my house at sunset. The light was so intense and it was bouncing around everywhere, and it's revealing the real structure of my face underneath all the makeup. This was very intentional. In my notes app in my phone, I keep a list of all of my painting ideas, and I've had the idea, drag queen lit up like Frankenstein. I've had that written down for years. To me, this visual really encapsulates who you are on the inside versus the person that you want to present. This is something that's very gripping to me. In this painting, yeah, I do feel utterly transformed, but I also look at this painting and it still feels like me, like I'm not lost in there. I wonder if other people feel this way. One of my favorite parts of this piece is how I painted my eyes. I have a heavy brow bone and really hooded eyelids. I'm sick of listening to bitches complain about their hooded eyes because you guys really don't get it. I could hide a nickel in mine. When I get in drag, I do the most work to rewrite the anatomy around my eyes. I yank my eyelids back as far as I can with duct tape, and then I do this technique where I expand the whites of my eyes on the outside, almost where people typically apply winged eyeliner. If I look at my painting from across the room, I think I successfully created the illusion of a completely different eye shape, but when I step closer, that illusion breaks and I can see the real shape of my eyes. I can tape my eyes all the way back to my hairline, but I can't shave down down my brow bone. In this painting, I can feel how incredibly heavy my brow bone is underneath all of the makeup, and that to me is where I see most of myself. I've done a lot of self-portraits throughout my career, but this one certainly stands out amongst the rest. To be honest, I paint a lot of self-portraits, mostly because I'm a convenient model, but like beyond that, doing a lot of self-portraits obviously makes your storytelling a lot more personal. I would recommend that everyone creates a self-portrait at one point or another. I think it's a fabulous exercise. I didn't do a self-portrait for a couple years after I started creating, and it took me a while to get comfortable with the procedure. The takeaway that I had when I first started doing them was that self-portraits help you discover self-love, and it's not that I entirely disagree with that sentiment, I just think it's a bit on the nose. Like every high schooler's artist statement, including mine, followed that general idea, and I just think that there's a lot more interesting dialogue beyond that. This take believes that a self-portrait has to capture a version of yourself that's likable or attractive, and I find that to be a bit narrowing. None of my self-portraits ever made me feel like I was particularly beautiful, they just made me feel like I'm a good artist. I think that everyone wants to paint the most honest version of themselves, but what if self-portraiture can't be honest? Because at some point, you're gonna have to choose the parts of yourself that you believe deserve to go into the painting, and I think that those choices say everything. Self-portraiture puts you in a weird loop, because you're both trying to control how you're seen and trying to see yourself clearly at the same time, and those two things work against each other. The second that you're trying to represent yourself, you're editing, whether you mean it or not. Even if it's vulnerable, even if it's raw, it's still curated. Another thing that I keep coming back to is that self-portraiture makes you confront the fact that you're not a fixed person. Every time I do one, I have different questions internally, so that portrait becomes a snapshot of that version of myself. And the weird part is, people might look at this painting and assume that it is me, and it can't be, it's just who I captured that day. And I think that's why I keep making them. It's not to figure out who I am, but it's to leave a trail of all the versions that I've been. I'm starting to feel like how I felt at the end of the sewing part of this project, meaning I don't want to do it anymore. Yesterday I did like 4 sessions and they all felt pretty miserable until I put the camera down and allowed myself to explore. Like I thought I had another session or two that I'd need to work on this backhand. I knew what I wanted it to look like. It would just take me a couple hours of tedious exercise to get there. But yesterday I like spontaneously decided to squish it around with my fingers a couple times, and it only took like 10 seconds, but it immediately fell into a place where I'm like, okay, that's done. That saved me a couple hours of rendering that I did not want to do. And then I started squishing around other things and making choices I've never made before, and that was the first time yesterday, after like 6 hours of working, that I felt like I was actually enjoying working on this. Longer painting projects start to feel like this at the end if I lose sight of what actually makes painting fun for me. So in order for me to finish this painting, I'm gonna need to explore until the very end. Luckily, I think I'm actually pretty close to the finish line, so next time we talk, we'll probably be in the final debrief. Wish me luck. I've actually been doing a lot of thinking about my future recently, and I'd love to share some of the things that I'm feeling because I think I have a pretty interesting perspective as a young person chasing a risky career during a burgeoning recession. Career-wise, I'm still working towards a livable income. I'm still really happy with my decision to drop out. I'm so lucky to be able to experiment with a creative career without $100,000 of debt floating over my head. I don't think I'll ever regret that decision. I'm also quite pleased living with my parents right now. The certainty of housing is allowing me to be as creative as I want rather than dumbing down my art so that it sells. Like, if I was scraping for rent payments, I wouldn't be able to drop everything to learn how to sew for 2 weeks. Like, that just couldn't happen. I only started doing this full-time like 2 years ago, so I'm still in the stages where I'm learning how to like do my taxes and finding what streams of income are right for me and investing in stuff. It's all a completely new world for me. I've certainly come a long way since I dropped out. My income streams are now a lot more diverse and reliable, but I'm still pretty far from where I need to be if I want to move out someday. In terms of immediate future, once I wrap up this project, I think I'm going to dive right into my art prize painting for this year. I already know what it's going to be. I've actually been communicating with someone about this project since last November, so it's well underway. After that, This drag project has been my favorite creative process of anything I've ever worked on before, so I'm teething at the idea of doing it again. My hands need to get under a sewing machine immediately. With my drag, I very much identify as a bedroom queen. This is someone who participates in the art form of drag from their bedroom and most of their working experiences online. I'm titling this painting Bedroom Queen because this is me. I'm such a bedroom queen, not only with my drag, but my entire relationship with creativity is like this. I work quietly in my bedroom and I show my art to people primarily through the internet. A bedroom queen is kind of frowned upon within the drag community, especially among seasoned queens, because it's a very safe approach to drag. A lot of the time, these girls evolve by taking their drag into the real world, entering a pageant or taking a gig or something. If I were to continue exploring my experience with drag through my paintings, I would love to be able to evolve my drag throughout. I think it would be really cool to prepare a package for a pageant, compete, and then make a painting about that experience. Beyond just saying that, I have no idea how to get involved in the drag community from West Michigan, so if any of you have any recommendations or connections to get me into the alternative pageant world, let me know. And please don't hold me to this because the idea makes me wildly anxious, although I'm confident it would be pretty cool. I've had a career thing pop up that I'd love to float over to you just to feel out what you think of it. I have the opportunity to work with a company to create an online painting course. The minimum cost that they sell courses for is about $100, and I would be responsible for making at least 4 hours of video content. Basically, in my head, I would create the course that I would want to watch from my favorite artists. On YouTube, I try to edit for retention at least a little bit, meaning I constantly stop myself from diving too fierce into explaining my process. In the situation of a course, I would be able to go off the deep end for the people who are interested in learning from the tiniest nuances of my process. I haven't signed any contracts yet, but initial vibes, is this something that you'd want to see from me? I was initially projected to graduate college in 2026, which is wild to think about. Next summer, I'm going to watch a lot of my friends walk the stage, and I feel like I kind of deserve a celebration of my own too. So next summer, I plan on handing over all of my paintings to my gallery, and I want to have my second senior show with them. The last time my paintings were in a gallery show was when I graduated high school, so it feels kind of poetic to graduate with them once again. I'm really eager to see how my new work and my new price point resonates within the art market. So I'm in a great spot, I think. I'm putting everything into my art so that it's the best it can be, and I'm putting everything into my career so that I can keep doing it forever. And this is pretty far out, but the big goal that I'm working towards right now is that I want to be a homeowner someday. I'm not sure how naive this is, especially given the state of the housing market. Renting has always seemed pretty pointless to me. I've never really liked the idea of throwing $1,200 a month to a landlord who doesn't care if I live or die. I don't need that much in a home, just a bedroom and a living room that I can turn into my studio. This is probably pretty far out, but one day I would love to document the process of buying my first home, moving in, and turning it into my painting studio. And a sewing studio, probably. I gotta have that too. It's time for my favorite part of every video, the final debrief. But first, I need to do a little bit of maintenance on my print shop. I'm gonna retire all of my old prints, so once all the remaining stock runs out, those are gone. This is to make room for the prints I made of this painting. This is the first time I'm gonna do a limited run of 40. They will be numbered. Here are all my prints in their remaining inventory. These two I accidentally printed at the wrong size last year and never listed. They'll be numbered too, why not? Also, my Etsy shop now ships internationally. That link is down below. I've had this painting done for 3 weeks now, and I've been waiting for the print production process to be wrapped up in order for me to post everything, and that process has been stalled, and I'm sick of waiting. I want to post my art. Let me post my art, guys. I'll keep you updated on Instagram and stuff when the prints drop, but they just aren't done yet. Okay. This is my 9th painting that I've made on YouTube, and every time I get to the final debrief, I'm always like, I'm not really sure if I like it or not. Let me be clear. I think that this is the best thing that I've ever made. I think that I found something really special when I mix my style of painting with my take on drag. As a piece of art, I think it's really interesting to paint a self-portrait in a disguise. I feel like I finally captured all of my creativity onto one canvas. And this painting is so gay. I think that my biggest qualm with this painting is how stiff the pose feels. I think this mostly has to do with me using the unedited reference photo for so long at the beginning of this project, or more so, my inability to recognize how stiff it felt before it was too late. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity in this punch to create something that's really bold and dynamic, but instead it kind of just feels like, well, my arm's here. I feel like I have a really maximalist mindset with art. I'm always pushing for better contrast and more dynamic poses and more impactful colors. Thinking about the big picture has definitely made my art a lot better, but with that, I don't want to lose sight of my rendering. This painting is the first time in a while where I feel like some of my rendering is lagging behind my compositional abilities. I did a good job on the face, I think, but the fist is just like super overworked and dry looking. I was going for something that was really energetic and painterly, but instead the fist just feels like a bad attempt at realism. And this bottom bit of the train is also pretty clunky compared to the rest of my rendering. While I was painting, I was doing a lot of reflection about my creative process. I absolutely loved the process of making this drag. By the end, of course, I got a little bit stir crazy, but by that point I was able to jump right into the painting part of this process. And once that started to burn me out, I thought about why I loved sewing so much, and it's because I was exploring. I'm way too young to be settled into one method of creating, and that's when this painting became my playground, not a paint by number. And I had some moments where I just loved painting again. It was the same feeling I had when I first picked up a paintbrush, and it's the same feeling I had a month ago when I was sewing this costume. And I'm gonna keep chasing that feeling forever. I discovered some new techniques, but more importantly, I rediscovered a sense of exploration that reminded me why I create. The only way that you're gonna have a fulfilling career making art is by connecting to the process. I paint because I like the process of creation, not because I like pretty paintings. I believe it's good to have moments that challenge your patience, but if you're stuck in a creative process that you hate, that isn't sustainable. This may be my favorite painting, but it's far from my largest. If you want to watch me make that, click here. Bye.